Elara Vancroft lived and breathed the scent of turpentine and potential. Her studio, a sprawling top-floor loft in the gleaming metropolis of Ethelberg, was a cathedral of her own making. Sunlight, filtered by the city's atmospheric shield, streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a dozen works in various stages of completion. Canvases leaned against walls like tired soldiers after a glorious battle, each one a universe of color and texture. Elara, at 26, was more than a painter. She was a cartographer of emotions, a physicist of the sublime. Her unique style, a fusion of hyperrealism and chaotic abstraction she called quantum impressionism, was the talk of the art world. Her brushstrokes didn't just depict a scene. They seemed to capture the shimmering, uncertain state of reality just beneath the surface. Her magnum opus, currently holding court in the center of the room, was titled The Event Horizon of a Teardrop. It was a staggering 2-meter by 3-meter canvas depicting a single crystalline tear falling into a swirling nebula. Within the tear's reflection, one could see not a face, but the birth of a star, the collapse of a galaxy, the entirety of a life lived in a fleeting moment. It was the piece destined to catapult her into the stratosphere of art history. Her life was as vibrant as her palette. Julian Croft, her fiancé, was the anchor to her soaring kite. A charismatic and discerning gallery owner, he had discovered her work in a small back-alley exhibition, championing her with a fierce passion that quickly blossomed into love. He was sharp, grounded, with eyes that saw both the artist and the woman, and loved them equally. He understood her obsessive need to create, her tendency to get lost in her work for days, subsisting on nutrient paste and raw inspiration. And then there was Leo, her younger brother, her shadow, her echo, her dearest friend. 2 years her junior, Leo was the wit to her contemplation, the silver tongue to her quiet observation. While Elara spoke through her art, Leo could charm a statue into telling its life story. He was studying xenolinguistics at the university, a field as esoteric and brilliant as he was. They were two halves of a whole, the artist and the orator, bound by an unshakable sibling bond forged in a childhood of shared dreams and whispered secrets. The call came on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, drizzly Tuesday that already felt like a harbinger. Elara was applying a final shimmering glaze to a star cluster within her masterpiece, her focus so absolute the city outside had ceased to exist. Julian's face appeared on her comlink, his expression shattered. "Elara, it's Leo. There's been an accident." The world, so brilliantly held together by her art, fractured into a million pieces. A gravelift malfunction at the university spire. A catastrophic 20-story fall, only partially cushioned by emergency kinetic dampeners at the last second. He was alive, the medics said. A miracle, they called it. But the miracle had a price. His spine had suffered a severe neural shock. The diagnostics were grim. Paralyzed from the waist down, permanently. The sterile white of the recovery ward was a violent assault on Elara's color-saturated world. Leo lay in the bio-bed, his face pale, his usually vibrant eyes clouded with a terrifying emptiness. The roguish charm was gone, replaced by a brittle fragility. When he saw her, his face crumpled and a sound of pure despair escaped his lips. "Lara," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "I can't feel my legs." In that moment, Elara's future, the one filled with international exhibitions, critical acclaim, and the intoxicating scent of success, dissolved. It was replaced by a single overriding imperative. Leo needed her. Her international tour, curated by Julian and set to launch in a month, was the first casualty. "I can't go, Jules. Not now." "We can postpone," he'd said, his voice gentle, his hands holding hers tightly. "Leo comes first, always." They moved Leo into her loft. It was the most pragmatic solution. The space was large enough for a state-of-the-art hoverchair, and she could convert the West Wing into a fully equipped care and rehabilitation suite. She packed away her easels, carefully shrouded the event horizon of a teardrop in a protective sheet, and tucked her brushes into storage. The smell of turpentine was replaced by the antiseptic scent of medical supplies. Her days, once a free-flowing dance of creativity, became a rigid schedule of medication, physical therapy, feeding, and emotional support. Leo was a ghost of his former self. The pain, he said, was constant, a phantom fire that burned in his useless limbs. He suffered from night terrors, his screams waking the loft and tearing at Elara's heart. She held him, soothed him, read to him until his ragged breathing evened out. She became his hands, his legs, his memory when the pain dampeners made his thoughts foggy. Her art was a phantom limb of her own. She'd feel a phantom itch in her fingers, a desperate urge to mix cerulean blue with titanium white. But the moment she thought of her abandoned studio, a wave of guilt would wash over her. How could she indulge in her passions when Leo was trapped in a prison of flesh? Julian was her rock. He handled the gallery, managed her finances, and spent his evenings with her and Leo, trying to bring a sliver of normalcy to their fractured lives. He'd bring gourmet food, regale them with stories from the art world, and engage Leo in debates about alien syntax, anything to see a flicker of the old fire in his eyes. The money was the first subtle shift. The cost of Leo's care was astronomical. The custom-built hover chair, the neural stimulators for his physical therapy, the consultations with off-world specialists, it all added up. Elara's savings, substantial for her age, began to dwindle. "We need to sell something, Lara," Leo said one evening, his voice thin and reedy. He gestured vaguely towards the shrouded canvases. "One of the smaller pieces from the Celestial Veins collection. You always said they were just studies." Elara's heart clenched. Selling a piece felt like selling a part of her soul. But looking at Leo's drawn face, the choice was obvious. "Of course, whatever you need." Leo insisted on handling the sale. "Let me do this," he'd pleaded. "It'll make me feel useful, not just this." He tapped a limp thigh with a fist. Julian had offered to manage it through the gallery, ensuring the best price, but Leo was adamant. He'd found a private collector, he said, someone discreet, willing to pay a premium to avoid the gallery's commission. It sounded plausible, and the flicker of purpose in Leo's eyes was worth more than any commission. Elara transferred the digital ownership certificate. A week later, a large sum of credits appeared in their joint account. It became a pattern. A few months later, it was another study, then a more significant piece from her early period. Each time, Leo would find a private buyer, and each time a substantial but not exorbitant amount of money would appear. Elara was too exhausted, too consumed with caregiving to question the details. She was just relieved they could afford the next wave of treatments. The second shift was Julian. Leo began to subtly plant seeds of doubt. "Julian seems distant, doesn't he?" Leo would muse, staring out the window at the cityscape. "He's always on his comms, taking hushed calls. I worry he's getting tired of all this." "He's not, Leo. He's just busy. He's been a saint," Elara would reply, her voice tight with defensiveness. "I know. It's just, a man like that, he's used to a certain life, attending galas, traveling, not being cooped up with an invalid." The word invalid was a carefully chosen poison dart designed to make Elara flinch with guilt and pity. Leo's manipulation was an art form in itself. He'd praised Julian to his face, thanking him with tear-filled eyes for his support. But the moment Julian left, the subtle campaign of psychological warfare would resume. He'd highlight every missed call, every late arrival, every moment of distraction from Julian, framing it not as the stress of a man running a business and supporting his family, but as the first signs of abandonment. Elara, sleep-deprived and emotionally raw, began to feel the cracks. She became needier, questioning Julian about his long hours, a hint of accusation in her voice. Their conversations became strained. The easy intimacy they once shared was replaced by a tense caution. Then came the third shift, the most audacious one. Leo started focusing on the masterpiece. "You know," he said one afternoon, his hover chair humming softly beside the shrouded canvas, "it's a crime for Event Horizon to be hidden away like this. It should be seen." "It will someday," Elara said wistfully. "A private viewing," Leo suggested, his eyes bright. "My buyer, the one who's been so generous, he's a true connoisseur. He knows your work is a long-term investment. He'd pay a fortune just for the privilege of seeing it. We could use the money to fund that new regenerative therapy from Cygnus X1. The therapy was a long shot, a new experimental procedure that might, just possibly, restore some nerve function. It was also prohibitively expensive. The thought of it, the tiny, dangerous spark of hope, was too much to resist. "Just a viewing?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. "Just a viewing," Leo promised, "in the loft, perfectly safe." Julian was vehemently against it. "Absolutely not, Elara. We don't know this collector. Showing a piece of that value to an anonymous buyer in your home is an insane security risk. If he wants to see it, he can make an offer through the proper channels." "You see," Leo whispered to her later, his voice laced with manufactured hurt. "He doesn't want me to get better. This is a burden for him. He wants things to stay just as they are." "That's not true," Elara snapped, but the poison was working. Was Julian afraid? Afraid that if Leo got better, she might return to her art, her career, and become less dependent on him? It was a vile, unworthy thought, and she hated herself for it. But in her exhausted state, it took root. She agreed to the viewing, behind Julian's back. The strangeness began in earnest a week before the scheduled viewing. Julian came to the loft late one night, his face grim. He wasn't carrying a bottle of wine or a takeout container. He was carrying a metallic briefcase. "Lara, we need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He looked at Leo, who was feigning sleep in his chair. Alone. In the soundproofed alcove, her former painting nook, Julian opened the case. It wasn't full of documents. It was full of high-tech equipment she didn't recognize. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about what I do," he began, his voice low. "The gallery is real, but it's also a cover. My primary work is more specialized. I work for an organization called the Aegis Directorate." Elara stared at him. Aegis was the clandestine military wing of the Interstellar Concordance, a shadowy entity spoken of in conspiracy theories. They were the boogeyman who dealt with threats regular forces couldn't handle. "You're a soldier?" she whispered, horrified. "An intelligence commander," he corrected gently. "And for the past year, my mission has been you, or more specifically, your art." He pulled out a scanner and aimed at a small, unassuming painting on the wall, one of the few she hadn't sold. A holographic display bloomed in the air between them, showing the painting's chemical composition. "Most of your pigments are standard," he explained, pointing to the glowing readouts. "But this one, this specific shade of iridescent blue you favor?" He isolated a single element, Iridium 192b. It's a synthetic isotope, incredibly rare. We thought we had the only stable source. The thing is, Lara, Iridium 192b is quantum entangled at the subatomic level. When you paint with it, your brushstrokes don't just apply color. They create a stable, macroscopic quantum state. Your paintings, they're not just paintings, they're maps." Elara's head was spinning. "Maps of what?" "Of space-time," Julian said, his eyes intense. "Your unique artistic talent can arrange the entangled particles into patterns that correspond to stable wormhole pathways. Pathways our most advanced quantum computers can't calculate. Your Celestial Veins collection? It's a flawless navigational chart for the Perseus arm. And the event horizon of a teardrop? Our analysts believe it's the key to a new instantaneous form of FTL travel we've only theorized about. We call it folding space. Your art isn't just priceless, Elara. It's the single most important strategic asset in the galaxy." She sank onto a stool, the world tilting on its axis. Her paintings,
Her beautiful, emotional paintings were military hardware? Why didn't you tell me? For your protection. As long as you were just an eccentric rising artist, no one would look too closely. But we detected a leak a few months ago. Someone started selling Iridium 192B on the black market. And then pieces of your art, your maps, began showing up in the hands of rival powers.
Specifically, the Xylos Corporation, a ruthless corporate state that wants to monopolize FTL travel. The blood drained from Elara's face. The private sales. Leo. No, she whispered. It can't be. Lara, who is this private collector Leo is dealing with? Julian pressed, his voice urgent. I don't know his name. Leo handled it all. A cold, slithering dread began to coil in her stomach. The discrepancies she had ignored, the convenient solutions, Leo's sudden expertise in the high-stakes art market, it was all a lie, a monstrous, impossible lie. I have to see, she breathed. That night, she waited until Leo was in his room, the door shut. Julian, overriding the loft security, patched her comlink into the building's internal sensor network. She had access to every camera, including the small one in the smoke detector in Leo's room. She watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. For an hour, the feed showed Leo lying in his bed, seemingly asleep. Then the blanket stirred. A leg, a perfectly healthy, muscular leg, swung out and planted itself firmly on the floor. Then another. Leo stood up. He stretched, his movements fluid and easy, a grotesque parody of a man waking from a restful sleep. He walked over to a hidden panel in the wall, one Elara had never known existed, and retrieved a secure comms unit. A woman's face, sharp and cruel, appeared on the holographic display. Silas, Leo said, his voice no longer weak and reedy, but cold and confident. Everything is set for the exchange. The masterpiece is prepped. The sister is a sentimental fool. She suspects nothing. And the fiancé? Silas's voice was like shattering glass. Croft is a problem, Leo admitted. He's been sniffing around. I've been working to isolate her from him. Tried to make a play for him myself, to see if he was corruptible. He's clean, annoyingly so. But it doesn't matter. By the time he realizes what's happening, we'll be gone, and so will the painting. Xylos is pleased with your progress, Leo, Silas said. The formula for the pigment you supplied has been verified. Once we have the primary navigation key, the teardrop, your payment will be transferred, and your new identity will be waiting. Just make sure it's a big enough beach, Leo said with a smirk. I've spent 2 years in this damned chair. I'm ready for some sun. He cut the connection. Elara fell back against the wall in her alcove, a silent scream trapped in her throat. The camera feed was still active. She watched as Leo, the brother she had sacrificed everything for, walked around his room, his steps light and mocking. He paused in front of a full-length mirror, a triumphant, ugly sneer on his face. He looked directly at his reflection, but Elara felt as if he were looking directly at her, across the years of trust and love he had just incinerated. 2 years. 2 years of her life, her love, her art, her future, all a lie. He hadn't just deceived her, he had hollowed her out, using her love as a tool to carve away her life, piece by precious piece. The money, the paintings, the wedge between her and Julian, it was all a calculated sociopathic masterpiece of betrayal. He hadn't just stolen her paintings, he had stolen her life. And now he was about to hijack the future of the galaxy. The teardrop in her painting was no longer a metaphor. It was real, and it was hers. The confrontation was a quiet storm. The following morning, Elara and Julian stood before Leo in the main studio space. The shroud had been removed from the event horizon of a teardrop. It dominated the room.
its cosmic colors seeming to mock the sordid terrestrial drama unfolding before it. Elara's voice was chillingly calm. "Stand up, Leo." Leo, sitting in his hover chair, feigned confusion. "Laura, what are you talking about? You know I can't." "I said," Elara repeated, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "Stand up." Julian held up a datapad, displaying the footage from the night before. Leo's face went through a rapid-fire series of emotions: shock, denial, fear, and finally a cold, hard resignation. The mask fell away. With a sigh that was almost theatrical in its boredom, Leo released the chair's occupant clamps. He rose to his feet, stretching with the casual grace of an athlete. The sight was so jarring, so profoundly obscene, that Elara felt a physical wave of nausea. "Well," Leo said, a smirk playing on his lips,
"I suppose the charade is over. It was getting rather tedious, I'll admit." 2 years, Elara whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Why?" Leo laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Why? Because you had everything, Laura. The talent, the fame, the golden fiancé. You were the star, and I was just the charming little brother. You think I wanted to spend my life in your shadow? I found out what your paint was really worth, what you were sitting on. You were wasting it, making pretty pictures for rich idiots. I saw its true potential." "So you crippled yourself?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously level. "A neurosuppressor implant," Leo said, tapping the base of his spine. "Brilliantly effective. Faked every diagnostic. A small price to pay for a lifetime of freedom and wealth beyond your wildest dreams. I sold the smaller pieces to Xylos as a down payment and gave them the pigment synthesis formula as a sign of good faith. Tonight, they get the prize, I get paid, and I disappear. You should thank me, Laura. I gave your little hobby a purpose." Every word was a hammer blow. The brother she loved had never existed. In his place was this cold, resentful stranger, a parasite who had fed on her compassion. "The exchange," Julian cut in, his eyes fixed on Leo. "When and where?" Leo's smirk widened. "You're too late, Commander Croft. Yes, I know all about you. Xylos has excellent intelligence. My buyer is on her way now. In fact," he glanced at his wristcom, "her transport should be docking on the roof in about 5 minutes. You see, this is my leverage. Try to stop me, and I'll tell them you're aegis. They'll level the building to get the painting." Julian's comm beeped. He glanced at it, his face grim. "He's not lying. Unidentified heavy transport on approach. My team is 5 minutes out. We're on our own until then." The loft, once Elara's sanctuary, was now a trap. "It's over, Leo," Elara said, her voice regaining its strength. She took a step towards her painting, the part of her soul he was trying to sell. "You're not taking it." "Try and stop me," Leo sneered. He pulled a small, wicked-looking pulse pistol from a hidden compartment in his useless hover chair. Just then, a concussive boom shook the entire building. The massive windows on the far wall spiderwebbed and then exploded inward, spraying the studio with crystallized glass. 3 figures in sleek black armor rappelled into the room, their assault rifles sweeping the space. They were followed by a woman with a face like a porcelain doll and eyes like chips of ice. Silas. "Leo," Silas said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Secure the asset. Eliminate the complications." The black-armored Xylos commandos opened fire. Julian reacted instantly, shoving Elara behind a massive petrified wood sculpture and returning fire with a compact sidearm he'd produced from an ankle holster. Plaster and paint dust filled the air as pulse rounds tore through the studio. shredding canvases, turning years of Elara's work into confetti. The scene was surreal. A firefight in her sanctuary, soldiers using her art for cover. This was the true price of Leo's betrayal. Leo, seeing his plan devolving into chaos, made a break for the masterpiece. He grabbed the edge of the massive canvas, intending to drag it towards the shattered window and the waiting transport. "Silas, I have it!" he yelled over the gunfire. Silas gave him a cold, dismissive glance. "Good. You've served your purpose." She raised her own weapon, not at Julian, but at Leo. The backfire. Not a grand, poetic twist of fate, but a simple, brutal business transaction. Xylos had what they wanted. The middleman was now a liability. Leo's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, our deal!" A pulse round hit him in the shoulder. He cried out, stumbling back, his hand slipping from the canvas. He was trapped between the Aegis commander who knew of his betrayal and the corporate killer who no longer needed him. Yet the true irony wasn't Silas's treachery. It was Elara's genius. As Julian unleashed suppressing fire, Elara scrambled from behind the sculpture. She didn't run for the exit. She ran towards her chemical cabinet. Her hands, guided by years of instinct, grabbed 2 canisters, turpentine delta and a powdered cobalt catalyst, the materials she used for stripping and cleaning her canvases. "Julian, buy me 10 seconds." She sprinted towards her masterpiece, dodging a stray energy blast that vaporized a nearby easel. Leo was on the floor, clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of pain and terror. Silas and her commandos were advancing, their attention focused on Julian. Elara didn't hesitate. With a primal scream of rage and violation, she threw the contents of both canisters onto the surface of the event horizon of a teardrop. For a moment, nothing happened. The painting, her soul's work, was just wet. Then, the iridium 192b reacted. It wasn't an explosion. It was an implosion of reality. The surface of the painting began to shimmer, not with light, but with a profound and terrifying darkness. The stable quantum state, the very thing that made the painting a map, destabilized. The intricate network of entangled particles, which Julian's team believed mapped the pathways of space-time, began to collapse in on itself. A low, guttural hum filled the room, a sound that vibrated not in the ears, but in the bones. A wave of shimmering violet energy pulsed outward from the canvas. It had no effect on the organic matter in the room. Elara and Julian felt only a strange tingling sensation. But for everything with a complex electronic or cybernetic system, it was a cataclysm. The Xylos commandos' armor seized up, locking them in place like statues. The lights in their helmets flickered and died. Their advanced pulse rifles went inert in their hands. Silas's own weapon sparked and fell silent. Her cybernetic eyes, which had glowed with a faint blue light, went dark, leaving her blind. And Leo screamed. He screamed a thin, agonized wail as the neurosuppressor at the base of his spine, the very device that had enabled his grand deception, short-circuited. The feedback loop sent a catastrophic cascade of energy through his spinal column. He convulsed on the floor, his legs twitching violently, before falling terrifyingly still. The hum from the painting faded. The violet light receded, leaving the canvas a ruined, blackened smear. It was destroyed, but it had saved them. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of approaching Aegis transports. Julian's team had arrived. The aftermath was sterile and efficient. Julian's Aegis squad, clad in pristine white armor, secured the paralyzed Xylos operatives. Silas, blind and powerless, was taken into custody, spitting silent curses. Medics attended to Leo. The irony was a cruel cosmic poem. The feedback from the neurosuppressor had flash-fried his lower spinal cord. The paralysis he had so convincingly faked for 2 years was now his permanent reality. There would be no experimental therapies, no miraculous recovery. Only a cold, unyielding stillness. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, his eyes met Elara's. There was no remorse in them. Only a bottomless, venomous hatred for the sister who had outsmarted him. He was taken not to a hospital, but to a secure ageist detention facility for interrogation. His life of sunny beaches was over before it began. In the wreckage of her studio, surrounded by the ghosts of her murdered paintings, Elara stood with Julian. He wrapped his arms around her, and she finally let herself collapse against him, the tears she'd held back for 2 years finally falling. "It's all gone," she sobbed, mourning the art, the love, the brother she thought she had. "No," Julian said softly, his lips against her hair. "It's not gone. It's just changed." Weeks later, Elara stood in a place that was both a studio and a laboratory. It was a vast circular room deep within an Aegis orbital station. The central wall was not a canvas, but a shimmering holographic energy field, 30 meters across. Below it, a console held not palettes and pigments, but quantum matter projectors and particle synthesizers. Her work was now classified at the highest level. She was no longer Elara Vancroft, celebrated artist. She was lead project director for the Event Horizon Initiative. Her talent, once used to explore the depths of human emotion, was now dedicated to charting the unknown depths of the cosmos. Julian stood beside her, his Aegis commander's uniform crisp and immaculate. The secrets between them were gone, replaced by a shared purpose that was deeper and more profound than anything they had before. "Ready to paint a new frontier?" he asked, his hand finding hers. Elara looked at the holographic void before her. It was a blank canvas of infinite possibility.
She had lost her brother, her fame, and the life she had known. But she had found something else, a truth. Her dream hadn't been stolen or put on hold. It had simply been too small. With a flick of her wrist, she activated the console. A swirl of nascent starlight, a nebula of shimmering quantum-entangled particles bloomed in the void. She was not just creating art. She was creating pathways. She was painting a new future for humanity, one brushstroke of light at a time. The turpentine was gone, but the scent of potential was stronger than ever. Her first stroke was a chord of pure energy, a thought impulse that sent a river of simulated gravitons flowing across the void. It felt nothing like the drag of a sable brush on canvas. There was no texture, no physical resistance, only a clean, frictionless act of will. Her new palette consisted of abstract concepts. She painted with gravitational lensing, shaded with temporal gradients, and added highlights of exotic matter. The vast holographic wall before her responded, the nascent pathway shimmering, a silver thread against the black. A dry cough came from her left. "The variance is still too high, Director," Dr. Eris Thorne said, his eyes never leaving the dizzying cascade of data on his own monitor. He was a man made of sharp angles and sharper intellect, the lead quantum physicist assigned to translate her intuitive leaps into reproducible science. He called her Director, a title that still felt like an ill-fitting coat. The entry vector is stable, but the terminus is fluctuating by 12,000 kilometers. You drop a ship into the corona of Tartarus Beta instead of its Lagrange point. "Art isn't about precision, Eris," Elara murmured, her fingers dancing over the console. "It's about feeling your way through. The path doesn't want to be forced." "With respect," Thorne countered, pushing his glasses up his nose, "the laws of physics are not open to emotional interpretation. We need a stable, predictable route to the UNS Odyssey. Their life support is failing." Julian placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "He's right, Laura, but so are you. What is it? What's wrong?" She sighed, pulling her hands back from the light. "It's empty. Before, when I painted a teardrop, but it was filled with grief and hope. I painted a nebula, but it was a cradle of life. This is just a line between A and B. There's no soul in it. I can't find the melody." Before Julian could answer, the soft ambient lighting of the laboratory gave way to a stark, flashing red. A priority alert. The holographic wall dissolved, replaced by the grim face of Admiral Quinn, the head of the Aegis Directorate. "Commander Croft," Quinn's voice boomed, foregoing pleasantries. "We have a situation. Long-range sensors have just detected a massive, unstable quantum event originating from the Xylos Black site in the Callisto Drift." Dr. Thorne's face went pale. He typed furiously at his console. "Admiral, their energy signature it's obscene. They're using the iridium isotope, but without the artistry. They're not folding space, they're trying to rip it open." "What does that mean?" Elara asked, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "It means," Thorne said, looking at her with a new, terrifying respect, "that your paintings were a scalpel, Director. Xylos has built a sledgehammer. If that field collapses, it won't just close, it will detonate. The resulting cascade could destabilize the entire sector." Quinn's expression hardened. "Their target appears to be a shielded dreadnought hidden in the drift. They're trying to create a shortcut for their flagship. We can't get a fleet there in time to stop them. Our only option is a surgical strike. We need to get a team inside that facility before they bring their reactor to full power." The implication hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "We need a map, Elara," Julian said, his voice low and urgent. "We need a door." The coordinates for the Xylos facility flashed on the main screen. Elara stared at them, and the world seemed to narrow to a single, sharp point of pain. The Callisto Drift. A lawless, chaotic asteroid field. Leo had described it to her once, years ago, long before the accident. He'd called it a place of beautiful destruction, where rogue planetoids ground each other into dust. The perfect place for a man who wanted to watch the universe burn.
The perfect place to hide a corporate black site. Her brother's betrayal found a new, deeper layer. He hadn't just been selling her out. He had been a willing partner in creating a weapon of mass destruction from her gift. "This isn't art," she whispered, turning back to the holographic void. "This isn't a weapon. It's a tool," Julian corrected, his voice firm. "And right now, it's the only tool that can save billions of lives. You can do this." She closed her eyes, shutting out the sterile lab, the data streams, the Admiral's stoic face. She thought of Leo's sneer. She thought of Silas's cold eyes. She thought of her canvases shredded by pulse fire. She thought of the beauty they were trying to twist into a blunt instrument of terror. And she found the emotion she needed. It wasn't the sublime awe of a new star. It wasn't the melancholic sorrow of a teardrop. It was rage, a cold, focused, diamond-hard rage. It became her pigment, her brush, her vision. Her hands flew across the console, no longer hesitant. This time, there was no gentle melody. It was a dissonant, furious symphony. She didn't paint a gentle flowing river of space-time. She painted a scar, a direct, brutal, searing line of pure intent. She weaponized her heartbreak, turning it into a spear aimed at the heart of the enemy. The holographic wall exploded with violent, jagged light. A pathway tore itself into existence, a tunnel of shimmering, incandescent energy that crackled with contained power. It was terrifying, and it was perfect. "My God," Thorne breathed, staring at his monitor. The terminus is stable, zero fluctuation. It's flawless. Julian was already moving, signaling to the Aegis commandos who had been waiting silently in the wings. "Strike team, on me. Prepare for immediate insertion." He turned to Elara, his face grim, but his eyes full of a love that transcended the chaos. He pulled her into a fierce, brief kiss. "You paint the path," he said against her lips. "I'll clear it." He and his team, clad in combat armor, ran towards a shielded gate at the far end of the room, behind which the entrance to the wormhole now lay open. Elara stood alone, her hands still tangling from the console. She watched the data stream, her map, her weapon, her art, holding steady. She had created a path born of fury, and now the man she loved was about to walk it into the heart of a nightmare she never knew she had authored. Her mind went with them. As Julian and his team stepped through the shimmering gate, a part of her was pulled along the path she had forged. It was a dizzying, disorienting sensation, as if her consciousness had become the very light traveling through the tunnel. She could feel the cold, sterile air of the Silos facility on the other end, could smell the ozone tang of a massive power source coming online. On the holographic wall, a single gold icon representing Julian's team moved steadily along the jagged line she had drawn. "Director, your biosigns are erratic," Dr. Thorne said, his voice tight with alarm. "Your neural activity is mirroring the energy flux within the conduit. It's impossible." "It's my painting, Aris," Elara said, her voice distant. "I'm in the frame." Within the asteroid, Julian's team emerged into chaos. Alarms blared, a synthesized voice screaming about an unauthorized wormhole incursion. Xylos security forces, encased in bulky, powerful exosuits, were already converging on their position, laying down a storm of plasma fire. The terminus of the wormhole, Elara's beautiful, terrible scar, shimmered behind them, an impossible door of light hanging in the metallic corridor. "Set up a perimeter," Julian ordered, his pulse rifle barking. "Team Beta, with me. We push to the reactor core, now." The firefight was brutal. Every concussive blast, every sizzle of plasma against armor, sent a jolt back through the wormhole. Elara flinched on her side of the void, her hands gripping the console, as flashes of pain and panic, not her own, flooded her senses. The jagged line on the holographic wall flickered violently. "The terminus is becoming unstable," Thorne shouted. "The weapon's fire is interfering with the quantum state. You have to reinforce it, or it will snap shut and strand them there." Reinforce it? She couldn't just will it to be stronger. A painting needed more paint. She plunged her focus back into the connection, but not with rage this time. She poured in feelings of resilience, of stubbornness, of unyielding defense. She visualized a painter's varnish, a protective layer, and wove it into the fabric of the wormhole. On the screen, the flickering lessened. She was holding the door open through a battle, an artist shielding soldiers with an intangible shield of emotion. Julian and his team reached the reactor chamber and stopped dead. It wasn't a machine. It was a cathedral of suffering. In the center of the vast room, a man was suspended in a cradle of wires and conduits, his body convulsing. His eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond sanity, and his mind was clearly connected to the massive, churning vortex of raw energy that Xylos was trying to shape, their sledgehammer. On a raised platform, a scientist in a Xylos lab coat barked orders, pushing the system to its breaking point. "They didn't replicate your art," Julian's voice came through the comms, breathless and horrified. "They imprisoned another artist." At that moment, Elara felt it too. A scream of pure agony across her psychic connection. It wasn't the clear, focused emotion she used to paint. It was a fractured, terrified, and uncontrollably powerful mind being burned alive to fuel a weapon. It was the psychic equivalent of nails on a chalkboard, a horrible, agonizing dissonance that threatened to tear her own concentration apart. "Bring it to full power," the Xylos scientist shrieked. "Now, collapse their entry point." The captive artist screamed, and the entire facility shuddered. A wave of raw, chaotic energy pulsed back through Elara's wormhole. Red alerts blared across the Aegis lab. "Director, get them out," Thorne yelled. "The feedback is going to cascade. He's going to take you both down." Closing the path would doom Julian, but holding it open felt like embracing a supernova. There was no good option, so she chose a third. An artist's choice. She couldn't overpower the raw psychic force of the dying man, so she harmonized with it. Ignoring Thorne's frantic warnings, Elara closed her eyes and reached out through the conduit, not with force, but with a whisper. She didn't send an attack, she sent a memory. The feeling of a clean brushstroke on a fresh canvas, the scent of turpentine and potential, the quiet joy of creation, the sublime peace of finding the perfect color. She sent him the image of her teardrop, not as a map, but as a symbol of sorrow given form and beauty. "You are not a tool," she projected. "You are an artist. This is not your work." On the other side, the effect was immediate. For one precious second, the churning, violent vortex of the Xylos rift calmed, its jagged edges smoothing into something resembling one of her own stable pathways. The psychic scream in Elara's mind softened to a whimper of exhausted relief. It was the opening Julian needed. "Now!" he roared. His team launched a volley of explosives at the reactor's control systems. The Xylos scientist was vaporized in the blast. Fall back to the gate," Julian commanded. As his team retreated, the captive artist's control shattered completely. The Xylos rift began to collapse catastrophically. The asteroid groaned around them as reality itself began to fray. "Lara, it's coming apart," Julian yelled into the comms. Elara's fingers flew across her console. She was no longer just maintaining the path. She was actively repainting their escape route, laying down strokes of stability just ahead of Julian's team while the very fabric of space-time unraveled behind them. The strain was immense. Blood began to trickle from her nose. The golden icon of Julian's team was a frantic blur on her screen, racing the crimson wave of the collapsing rift. They burst through the gate just as she threw every last ounce of her will into a final desperate command: close. The wormhole snapped shut with a sound like a cracking whip, severing the connection. The psychic backlash hit her like a physical blow. The world dissolved into a universe of white, blinding pain, and she knew no more. She awoke to the steady beep of a medical monitor and the soft pressure of a hand on hers. Julian was sitting by her bedside, his face bruised and grimy, his uniform torn, but his eyes were clear. "You did it, Lara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved them. You saved us all." She had, but the victory felt hollow. "The other one," she whispered, her throat dry. "The artist." Julian's face tightened.
He didn't make it. What they did to him, he was just the first. Our intelligence unit is decrypting the data we recovered. Xylos has a program, Project Chimera. They're actively hunting for people with nascent abilities like yours across the galaxy, trying to turn them into living weapons. Elara looked past him, out the viewport of the medbay. The stars seemed colder now, less like objects of beauty and more like hiding places for monsters. Her gift, her soul, was now a commodity in a war she never knew existed. She had won the battle, but she now understood she was the primary target and the prize in the war to come. Her canvas had just expanded to encompass the entire galaxy. The silence of the medbay was a lie. In the quiet space between the rhythmic beeps of the monitor, Elara could still hear the ghost of a scream. It was a psychic echo, a residue of the tortured artist she had touched through the void, and it resonated in her mind like the phantom limb of a shared soul. His name was Kalen, Julian said, his voice a low rumble beside her. He'd been holding a cool cloth to her forehead. According to the fragments we pulled from the Xylos data core, he was a sculptor from Kepler 186f. He didn't work with space-time. His medium was manipulating microsingularities. He could shape gravity. Xylos took him 6 months ago. Elara's new reality was a gallery of horrors. She pictured a sculptor's hands, tools of creation, being repurposed for destruction. "How many more?" she whispered. "We don't know," Julian admitted, his grip on her hand tightening. "The Chimera files are buried under layers of quantum encryption. What we do know is that they see you, all of you, as a natural resource to be strip-mined." The door hissed open, admitting Admiral Quinn and Dr. Thorne. The physicists looked different. The academic arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of profound, almost fearful respect. "Director Vancroft," Quinn began, his voice leaving no room for convalescence. "I'm glad to see you're awake. We have a problem that requires your unique perspective." Thorne stepped forward, projecting a swirling, chaotic star chart into the center of the room. "While you were connected, we were able to calibrate our quantum sensors to the frequency of your specific talent. We've been scanning the galactic background for similar dissonances. We found one." He isolated a single point of light in the lawless outer rim. The data flowing from it was erratic, pulsing like a frightened heartbeat. It wasn't the clean, focused signature of a trained artist, but a raw, uncontrolled outpouring of energy. It looked, to Elara's senses, like a child splashing paint in a dark room, unaware of the masterpiece or the mess they were creating. "The signature is flaring," Thorne said grimly. "Whatever this person's ability is, they're losing control. It's making them a beacon. A Xylos scout fleet was just diverted to that sector. They'll be there in less than 72 hours. Elara felt a jolt, a pang of possessive empathy. Another one, alone and terrified. "We have to get them out." "That's the difficulty," Quinn stated, his arms crossed. "The system is controlled by the Jorvian Syndicate. They're officially neutral, but they trade with anyone, including Xylos. We can't send a fleet without sparking a diplomatic incident. It has to be a covert extraction. One small ship, and we'd be going in blind if not for you." The request was unspoken but absolute. They needed another map. They needed her to paint a door into a system she'd never seen, based on nothing but a psychic echo. "I can't," Elara said, the admission tasting like ash. "When I try to reach for it, all I feel is him, Kalen, the pain. The colors are all wrong now. They're gray." Julian shot a warning look at the Admiral. "She needs time to recover." "Xylos won't give us time," Quinn countered flatly. "That person on Jorvia won't have time." A heavy silence filled the room, the weight of a stranger's life settling squarely on Elara's shoulders. She had wanted to create art that moved people. Now she was being asked to create a path that could save one. "There's one other source of intelligence we haven't tapped," Julian said, his voice turning to ice. He looked at Elara, his expression pained. "Leo. He was a high-level operative for them. He must have intel on the Chimera protocols, how they track and capture their targets." "I'm scheduled to begin his interrogation in 1 hour." Leo. The name was a key that unlocked a room of cold fury inside her. He was no longer her brother. He was a hostile asset, a font of information that could prevent what happened to Kalen from happening to someone else. "His file says he's non-responsive since the incident," she said, her voice flat. "He's faking," Julian replied without hesitation. "He's waiting, calculating. He'll try to play me, same as he played you. But he won't expect you." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "You don't have to. I can handle it. But if your presence could break him, give us the edge we need to get to Jorvia in time." The choice was hers.
hide from the ghost of her past, or confront the monster to save a future for a stranger. The psychic echo in her mind, Kaylin's scream, seemed to quiet, replaced by the frantic, frightened pulse from the Jorvian system, one ghost for another. She swung her legs over the side of the biobed, the deck cool beneath her feet. The gray in her mind didn't disappear, but it shifted. It was no longer the color of grief. It was the color of stone, of resolve. "I'll be there," she said, looking not at Julian, but at the star chart where a single terrified light was pulsing in the dark. "Tell me everything you know about interrogation." The interrogation cell was the antithesis of her studio. It was a perfect sterile cube of sound-dampening white alloy, illuminated by a cold, sourceless light. There was no turpentine, only the faint metallic tang of recycled air. In the center of the room, Leo sat in a restraint chair, his body limp from the waist down, clad in a simple gray uniform. He looked smaller, diminished, but his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were as sharp and venomous as ever. Julian stood behind her, a solid presence in his dark Aegis uniform. An invisible containment field hummed between them and the prisoner. "He knows we're watching," Julian said quietly, his voice in her ear. "He's been waiting. Remember the protocol. I ask the questions, you just watch, unless we signal." Elara gave a curt nod, her hands clasped behind her back to stop them from trembling. This was a composition of lies, and she needed to find the flaw, the single brushstroke that betrayed the entire piece. Julian stepped forward, his voice a formal, detached instrument. "Leo Vancroft, this is a formal inquiry into the activities of the Xylos Corporation's Project Chimera. Your cooperation will be noted." A slow, mocking smile spread across Leo's lips. He ignored Julian completely, his gaze fixed on Elara. "Lara, you look tired. All that galactic importance must be exhausting. Is this your new studio? It lacks a certain flair." "Answer the question, prisoner," Julian's voice cut in, hard as steel. "Prisoner?" Leo laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, Jules, always so dramatic. I'm family. Tell me, Lara, does he still bring you those little cakes from the patisserie in the old quarter? Or has it all been nutrient paste and state secrets since you traded your brushes for a battleship?" Every word was a carefully aimed dart, meant to reopen old wounds, to remind her of the life he had poisoned. She could feel her resolve wavering, the gray in her mind churning with old grief. Then she felt the faint, frantic pulse from the Jorvia system, a psychic mayday from a stranger. It was an anchor. She took a step forward, breaking the protocol. Julian tensed but didn't stop her. "Project Chimera," she said, her voice devoid of all warmth. It was a stranger's voice. "How do they find them?" Leo's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected tears, anger, recriminations. This cold focus was new. "Find who? The talent?" "Xylos is very discerning. They have recruiters." "Like you?" she pressed. "Did you recruit Kaylin?" The name hit him. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt, but the irritation of a gamesman whose opponent knew a piece they shouldn't. "The sculptor, a pity," Leo mused, recovering quickly. He had a heavy hand, all raw power, no finesse. Not like you, Lara. You were always about the nuance. "The files said he was captured. They don't capture, they lure," Julian stated. Leo leaned back, the picture of condescending ease. "Why should I tell you? So you can save another of my replacements? Face it, Lara, you're a prototype. Xylos has a whole new generation coming. They will perfect what you started. Your art will become their industry, your legacy." That was his mistake. The narcissistic need to prove his own importance, his proximity to power. Elara saw the opening. She didn't attack his betrayal, she attacked his ego. My legacy? She repeated, a humorless smile touching her own lips for the first time. You still don't get it? You were never a recruiter, Leo. You were bait, just like the others. I was their chief operative, he hissed, a crack in his composure. You were a test case, Elara countered, her voice dropping, weaving a new truth for him. They gave you the neurosuppressor and the resources to see how close you could get to me, to see how a high-value asset could be manipulated by a trusted source. You weren't Silas's partner. You were her experiment. Kalen was, they will perfect what you started. Your art will become their industry, your legacy. That was his mistake. The narcissistic need to prove his own importance, his proximity to power. Elara saw the opening. She didn't attack his betrayal, she attacked his ego. My legacy, she repeated, a humorless smile touching her own lips for the first time. You still don't get it. You were never a recruiter, Leo. You were bait, just like the others. I was their chief operative, he hissed, a crack in his composure. You were a test case, Elara countered, her voice dropping, weaving a new truth for him. They gave you the neurosuppressor and the resources to see how close you could get to me, to see how a high-value asset could be manipulated by a trusted source. You weren't Silas's partner. You were her experiment. Kalen was the next phase, weaponization. You were just the key used to unlock the door. And like any key, once the door is open, you're disposable. She saw the poison find its mark. His whole identity was built on being the clever one, the puppet master. To be told he was just another puppet, and a primitive one at that, was an existential threat. You're lying, he spat, but his certainty was gone. Am I? Elara said softly. When Silas shot you, did she look like she was losing a valued partner or getting rid of loose ends? They didn't need you anymore, Leo. They had me, and now they have others. You're old tech, a footnote in my file. Leo's face was pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. He was trapped, not by the containment field, but by the crushing weight of his own insignificance. Tell me how they find them, Elara commanded, her voice ringing with newfound authority. Tell me, and I'll have them add a line to that footnote, cooperative. He stared at her for a long moment, his mind racing. Then he broke. A bitter, broken laugh escaped his lips. You want to know how the wolves find the sheep? They don't look, they listen. He finally looked at Julian. It's the emotional signature, the uncontrolled broadcast. That's the scent. When an untrained artist, or whatever we are, has a major emotional event, fear, grief, rage, they flare up on a psychic level. Chimera has a network of deep space sensor arrays, the harvesters, disguised as comms relays. They listen for those flares. That's how they found Kalen after his daughter died. That's how they'll find the one on Jorvia. He gave Elara a look of pure malice. And that's how they first found you, Lara, right after the accident. Your grief was a lighthouse. The final betrayal landed. They had orchestrated it all. The accident, his injury, her agony. It was all a script to make her flare, to put her on their map. Elara felt nothing. The stone inside her was too dense. She had what she needed. She turned and walked out of the cell without a backward glance, Julian right behind her. Back in the command lab, the gray in her mind was still there, but it was no longer a fog. It was a canvas, prepped and waiting. She understood now. The rage she had used to forge the path to the black site, the harmony she had found with Kalen's pain, they were just colors. She had been trying to paint with a single emotion, but the universe demanded a more complex palette. She walked to the holographic projector,
the image of the Jorvian system pulsing before her. She could feel the fear from the unknown artist, but now, thanks to Leo, she could also feel the cold, predatory listening of the harvester array nearby. Fear and threat, desperation and deliverance. It was a complete composition. "Aris," she said, her voice clear and strong, "get the UNS Pathfinder ready for a covert jump. Julian, you have your team." Her hands went to the console. She reached out, not with a single feeling, but with a chord of them. She took the terror of the hunted and wove it into the resolve of the rescuer. She used the memory of Leo's betrayal as a shadow to define the light of Julian's trust. She painted a path that was both a scream and a whisper, a hiding place and a doorway. It was a jagged, dangerous, and brilliantly complex route that danced between the harvester's sensor pings, a path only an artist in the full, glorious, terrible spectrum of their emotion could possibly conceive. The void ignited. A new map, more intricate and beautiful than any she had created before, blazed into existence.
"Hold on," she whispered into the cosmos. To a stranger she felt she already knew. "I'm coming." The journey through the new wormhole was a symphony. Unlike the previous path, which had been a singular, screaming note of rage, this one was a complex and layered composition. Julian and his strike team felt it as they moved through the shimmering conduit. A baseline of taut anxiety, overlaid with a soaring, hopeful melody of determination. It was the feeling of a tightrope walker, balanced perfectly between fear and resolve. Elara had painted them a ghost's path, a secret way through the universe's back alleys. They emerged not into a sterile corridor, but into the grimy, humming cavern of a derelict cargo freighter in Jorvia's primary orbital dock. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, fried noodles, and desperation. The exit point shimmered behind them for a moment before folding into nothingness, leaving them in the dim, flickering light of the dead ship. "Comms check," Julian ordered, his voice low in their helmets. "Dr. Thorne, are you receiving?" "Loud and clear, Commander," Thorne's voice crackled back from the Pathfinder. "The harvester array didn't register your entry. Her path was acoustically invisible, for lack of a better term. Director Vancroft is stable, but she's maintaining the psychic link. She's your compass." "Copy that." Julian looked at his team. "Weapons on stun. This is a retrieval, not an invasion. We make no waves." They moved out of the freighter and into the chaotic swirl of the dock city, a labyrinth of stacked shipping containers, makeshift noodle bars, and black market tech stalls, all slick with neon-drenched rain. The Jorvian Syndicate's presence was everywhere, in the hulking, cybernetic enforcers patrolling the walkways, and the stylized Kraken sigil that seemed to be branded on every surface. Through the link, Elara filtered the psychic noise of the station for Julian. "It's like trying to find one specific instrument in a badly mixed orchestra," her thoughts echoed in his mind, tinged with exhaustion. "Thousands of people, greed, fear, ambition, it's deafening." "Focus, Lara," Julian subvocalized, his eyes scanning the crowds. "What does the target feel like?" "Scared," she sent back immediately. "Small, and there's a resonance, a vibration, not a sound, but the feeling of one. It's coming from below, the Undercity, Sector Gamma 7. Getting to the Undercity without alerting the Syndicate was a nightmare of back-alley deals and bribed freight lift operators. As they descended, the neon glow gave way to the bioluminescent fungus that grew in the station's guts. Here the air was heavy with the smell of unrecycled water and decay. The psychic noise lessened, and the target's signature grew stronger. It was, as Elara had described, a frantic, dissonant chord of fear. They found the source in a forgotten maintenance duct behind a rusted grate.
Inside the small, cramped space was a girl no older than 9, with wide, terrified eyes and grimy hands clutching a small, crudely made stringed instrument. Around her, the very air seemed to hum, and loose bolts on the walls vibrated in sympathetic harmony with her panicked breathing. Julian raised a hand, signaling his team to halt. He removed his helmet, his expression softening. "It's okay," he said gently. "We're not here to hurt you." The girl flinched, and a low, guttural thrumming sound emanated from her, shaking the entire corridor. The metal plates beneath their feet groaned in protest. "Julian, it's not just psychic." Elara's thought voice was urgent. "Her emotions generate actual sonic frequencies. When she's scared, she creates infrasound. Destructive resonance. That's what's causing the flares." "We're here to help," Julian continued, taking a slow step forward. "What's your name?" "Lyra," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. Suddenly, a new voice, amplified and metallic, boomed down the corridor. "Secure the asset! Kill the intruders!" Syndicate enforcers, their heavy armor stamped with the Kraken, rounded the corner, their plasma casters already glowing. They hadn't been looking for the girl. They had been responding to the localized seismic disturbance she was creating. Simultaneously, Elara's voice screamed in Julian's mind. "They're here! Xylos! A team just docked! Sector Gamma 6! They're moving fast!" They were caught. A pincer movement with a terrified, sonic-powered child at its center.
"Fall back!" Julian yelled, laying down suppressing fire. Lyra, overwhelmed by the noise and violence, screamed. This time, it wasn't a low hum. It was a high-frequency shriek of pure terror that manifested as a visible wave of force buckling the corridor walls and shattering the enforcers' helmet visors. "Lara, I need a door, now!" Julian yelled into the void. "I can't, not with her screaming. The frequencies are tearing my concentration apart." It was chaos. Syndicate forces pinned them from one direction, while the telltale whine of Xylos pulse rifles echoed from the other. Lyra was huddled in a ball, her uncontrolled sonic wails causing the entire structure around them to shudder and break apart. They were out of time and out of options. Then a new presence entered the psychic link. It wasn't a voice, it was a feeling, a calm, quiet sense of creation. The ghost of Kyalan, the sculptor, the residue of his consciousness that had clung to Elara, reached out. It didn't try to silence Lyra's fear. It tried to give it shape. Inspired, Elara changed her approach. She stopped trying to paint a path out. She started painting a path in. She didn't project thoughts of calm or safety at the girl. She projected the image of Lyra's own instrument. She sent the feeling of fingers on strings, of tuning a dissonant chord into harmony. She didn't fight the girl's sonic fear. She gave it a melody. "Listen," Elara sent, not to Julian, but to Lyra. "Don't scream, sing." On the floor of the shaking corridor, Lyra looked up. Her terror-filled eyes seemed to focus on something unseen. Her sonic shriek softened, wavered, and then coalesced into a single, pure, resonant note. It was a sound of impossible beauty and power. The violent shaking stopped, but the note held, creating a shield of standing sound waves around them that deflected incoming plasma bolts like a physical barrier. In the moment of stunned silence from their attackers, Julian scooped up the girl. "Go, to the extraction point!" The sound shield collapsed as they ran, but it had bought them the time they needed. They sprinted through the decaying Undercity, Elara's mind now clear enough to paint them a frantic, improvised path through maintenance shafts and forgotten conduits. They reached the rendezvous point, a garbage scow about to make a run to the system's burn-off point, just as Xylos and Syndicate forces converged on their position. Julian and his team jumped into the filth-filled cargo bay, the little girl held securely in his arms. A moment later, the Pathfinder, decloaking just enough, teleported them from the scow and into its sterile medbay. They were safe.
As the ship jumped, Elara's connection severed, and she slumped in her chair in the lab, exhausted but triumphant. Later, in the quiet of the ship, Elara sat with Lyra. The girl was clean now, wrapped in a warm blanket, her little stringed instrument clutched in her lap. She wasn't humming with fear anymore. "You heard me," Elara said softly. Lyra nodded, plucking a single, clear note from the string. "You showed me the music." Elara felt a shift inside her. She wasn't just a cartographer of space-time. She wasn't just a weapon. She was a conductor. And looking at the small girl, a refugee from a war she didn't understand, Elara realized her work had just begun. She had to find the others. She had to gather the rest of the orchestra before Xylos forced them to play a symphony of destruction. Admiral Quinn's office was a stark void of polished obsidian and holographic star charts. "A conductor," he repeated, his voice devoid of any artistic appreciation. "An interesting metaphor, Director, but an orchestra requires a concert hall, a safe harbor." "That's what this station is," Julian interjected, standing beside Elara. "Aegis can protect them." "Protect them from Xylos, yes," Quinn conceded. "But can we protect them from themselves?" Lyra nearly brought down a city block because she was frightened. What happens when we bring in someone whose talent is manipulating thermal energy or temporal mechanics? We are gathering sentient, emotional weapons of mass destruction. Dr. Thorne, standing by a data console, cleared his throat. "With respect, Admiral, that's what makes Director Vancroft's role so vital. She's not just a finder, she's a tuner. Lyra's output post-rescue has stabilized. Her destructive infrasound has been refined into a controlled, coherent frequency.
She can now isolate and identify specific material resonances from kilometers away. We gave her a scan of a Xylos alloy, and she pinpointed a hidden arms cache in the seized Frieder's Hall like it was a tuning fork. A small holographic window popped up, showing Lyra in a comfortable observation room. She was gently plucking her instrument, and on a nearby monitor, a complex seismic image of the station's superstructure resolved into perfect focus. She wasn't just making music, she was performing sonar with it. Elara watched the girl, a fierce, protective feeling rising in her. "They aren't weapons, Admiral, they're people. Xylos sees them as a resource. If we see them as anything less than individuals, we are no better." Quinn fixed his gaze on her. It was not unkind, but it was as hard as neutronium. "And how do you propose we find these individuals? Wait for another psychic scream to echo across the galaxy? Hope we get there before Xylos does?" "No," Elara said, a new idea taking shape, born from the harmony she'd found with Lyra. "We don't wait for them to scream, we give them a song to sing along to." She turned to the holographic star chart. "Leo said Xylos listens for flares, for emotional outbursts. They're hunting for dissonance. I'm going to create the opposite, a broadcast, a stable, complex, resonant psychic signature. Not a map, not a weapon, but a piece of music. It will be too subtle for the harvester arrays to register as a threat, but any mind like mine, like Lyra's, will feel it. It will be a whisper that says, 'You are not alone.'" Thorne looked intrigued. "A psychic broadcast. The energy requirements would be immense, and the complexity." "The complexity is the point," Elara insisted. "It won't be a brute force signal. It will be a piece of art, a question only another artist can answer." The plan was audacious, bordering on insane, to deliberately paint a target on herself, hoping to attract friends before enemies. Julian's jaw tightened, the risks clear in his eyes, but he said nothing, his trust in her absolute. Quinn considered it for a long, silent minute. "Do it," he said finally. "Project Cadenza is a go. Find your orchestra director, and let's hope they don't bring the house down." That night in her laboratory studio, Elara stood before the blank holographic canvas. Julian stood with her, his presence a quiet anchor in the vast, silent room. "This is different," he said. "Before, you were creating something with a destination, a purpose. This is a message in a bottle thrown into the biggest ocean in existence." "All art is," she replied, her fingers hovering over the console.
You create something, you put it out into the world, and you hope it finds the person who needs to see it. She looked at him, her expression vulnerable for the first time since the interrogation. I can feel them out there, Julian, little points of light. Some are flickering, some are hiding. Xylos wants to turn them into firestorms. I just want to let them know it's safe to shine. He stepped closer, framing her face with his hands. Just make sure you don't burn out in the process, Laura. She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from it, then turned back to the void. She began her work. This time, she didn't use rage or fear or even hope as her medium. She used the one emotion that had been her constant, the very thing Leo's betrayal had failed to destroy, the quiet, profound, unshakable love of creation itself. She painted the feeling of the first perfect line on a blank page. She wove in the resonant crystalline beauty of Lyra's music. She added the memory of Kalen's hands shaping gravity, transforming his pain into a memorial. It was a complex, layered broadcast of pure, unadulterated artistry, a silent song that began to ripple out from the station, through the folds of space-time, across the star-strewn canvas of the galaxy. A call from one artist to another, a promise of a safe harbor in a gathering storm. The song flowed from her, a silent, shimmering tide that washed through the void. It was a complex and fragile thing, made of equal parts sorrow and starlight, memory and potential. For weeks, Elara broadcasted, her mind a lighthouse on an infinite shore. The Aegis station, now informally nicknamed the Conservatory, became a listening post for whispers on the edge of reality. The first echo came back not as a sound, but as a color.
A flash of impossible, vibrant magenta on the edge of the Perseus arm that tasted of joyful chaos. Dr. Thorne's sensors registered it as a localized, temporary breakdown in the laws of probability. A day later, a young gambler from a casino station, a boy who thought his luck was just an uncanny skill at cards, was discreetly extracted by Julian's team. His talent was painting with chance, nudging quantum outcomes. He could make a missile miss its target or a reactor fail safely. He became the orchestra's percussionist, the keeper of their chaotic rhythm. The second was a scent, a psychic aroma of old parchment and ozone that emanated from a reclusive historian in a monastic archive. She could read the memories of inanimate objects, a talent she had mistaken for a hyperactive imagination. She became their library, their memory, able to pull Xylos' battle plans from a piece of recovered ship plating. They came one by one. A boy who dreamed in gravitational waves. A woman who could coax raw data into new poetic configurations. They were the lost, the hidden, the ones who thought they were simply odd or blessed with a strange curse. Elara's song gave them a name and a home. Her orchestra was assembling. But a song that beautiful, however subtle, eventually attracts critics. Xylos couldn't decipher the music, but their harvester arrays, recalibrated after the Jorvia incident, could triangulate the musician. They saw the pattern. Psychic flares followed by Aegis extractions. They realized Elara wasn't just hiding, she was recruiting. She was building an arsenal of miracles, and they had no counter. Their response was brutally direct. An elite Xylos fleet led by a new dreadnought, the Chimera, folded space and appeared on the edge of the conservatory's system. They didn't hail, they didn't posture. They launched a single, devastating weapon. It wasn't a missile. It was a person. Admiral Quint's face was a mask of granite on the main screen. It's a captive artist director, a teleporter. They're using him as a living siege engine, punching holes in our defensive screen for boarding parties to pour through. Alarms blared as the station's shields flickered under the strain of dozens of micro-wormholes opening and closing, depositing Xylos commandos deep within the station's superstructure. The psychic feedback hit Elara like a physical blow, the teleporter's agony, a mind being torn apart with every jump. "I can't map him," she gasped, gripping her console.
He's not moving through space. He's just reappearing. It's pure chaos. It was a brilliant strategy. Xylos was using an artist's pain to nullify her greatest strength. While Julian led the station's ground defenses against the boarders, Elara felt sickeningly powerless. Then came the second attack, the one aimed directly at her. A psychic voice, oily and familiar, slithered into her mind. It wasn't broadcast from the Xylos fleet. It came from within the station, from the brig. It's a beautiful sound, Lara, a symphony for lost souls. But you've forgotten the most important instrument, the discordant note that gives the music its meaning. Me. Xylos hadn't just brought a teleporter. They had activated their Trojan horse, Leo. They had smuggled a psychic amplifier into his cell, disguised as a replacement part for his life support. He couldn't create, but he could corrupt. His voice, amplified and venomous, flooded the psychic network connecting Elara to her orchestra. He didn't attack her, he attacked them. He whispered to the gambler, reminding him of the crushing debts that had led him to the casino, turning his playful handle on probability into a frantic, desperate fear of failure. He showed the historian images of her archive burning, twisting her gift of memory into a weapon of torment. He was introducing dissonance, turning Elara's symphony into a cacophony of individual terrors. The artists began to flare, their powers becoming unstable. The probability shields around the station began to fail. Lyra's resonant frequency spiked, threatening to shake a nearby bulkhead apart. Elara tried to counter him, to reinforce her song, but it was like trying to build a sandcastle in a hurricane. His hatred was a focused, singular thing. Her broad, hopeful melody was no match for its targeted cruelty. The chimera began to advance, its main weapon charging, preparing to deliver the final, killing blow.
Julian's voice cut through the comms, breathless from the fighting. "Lara, whatever you're doing, do it faster. We can't hold them." She looked at the chaos unfolding on the tactical display, the failing shields, the advancing dreadnought, the psychic screams of her terrified friends. And she looked inward, at the voice of her brother, the architect of so much of her pain. He was right. He was the discordant note. And a symphony can't ignore its discord. It must resolve it. She stopped fighting him. She closed her eyes and let his hatred wash over her. She let go of her broadcast, her brand sweeping song of hope. In the sudden silence, Leo's voice was the only thing left. He faltered, surprised. And then she focused every ounce of her will, every fiber of her talent, on a single person, Leo. She didn't send him a song. She sent him a memory. Their memory. Not the lie of his paralysis, but the truth beneath it. She sent him the feeling of a summer afternoon in their childhood garden, the two of them sketching impossible alien worlds in a shared notebook. She sent him the fierce pride in his eyes the day she sold her first painting. She sent her honest, unvarnished love for the brother she thought he was, not as a weapon, not as a plea, but simply as a statement of fact, a thing that had existed. Then she showed him what he had become. She held up a psychic mirror to his soul. She didn't show him a monster. She showed him a small, resentful boy, terrified of being left behind in his brilliant sister's shadow. She took the ugly, dissonant chord of his hatred, and she held it, examined it, and found the single, sad, solitary note of pain at its core. And then she did what an artist does. She gave it a name. She gave it a color. She wrapped it in the melody of her own grief for him, and for the first time broadcasted not just to the lost, but to him. "I miss my brother," she sent, a thought of devastating simplicity and truth. The psychic assault stopped.
In his cell, Leo stared at the wall, a single tear tracing a path down his face. The amplifier beside him sparked and went silent. He had poured his entire being into his hatred, and she had refused to hate him back. She had simply mourned him. It was a language his bitterness could not compute. He had been disarmed not by a psychic blast, but by a portrait of his own broken heart. He curled into a ball, the sound of a man weeping, the only sound in the silent cell. With Leo's dissonance gone, the psychic network cleared. Elara reached out to her orchestra, no longer as a distant conductor, but as a fellow musician. She didn't just send them a song, she felt their fear and harmonized with it. She showed the gambler that luck was not a switch to be flipped, but a tide to be navigated. She reminded the historian that memory was not just a record of pain, but a blueprint for survival. The orchestra began to play again. Not her song, but their own. Lyra's sonic resonance, now focused and clear, struck the chimera's primary weapon capacitor, finding its precise resonant frequency and shattering it from within. The gambler nudged the probability of the teleporter's next jump, causing him to reappear not inside the station, but in the cold, empty void between ships. The historian, reading the memory of the light from the enemy fleet, pinpointed the command shield's modulations. Guided by a symphony of impossible talents, the Aegis fleet, with Julian's ship at its head, tore through the disorganized Xylos forces. The Chimera, its main weapon crippled and its command structure in chaos, turned and fled. The battle was over. The silence that descended upon the conservatory was not one of absence, but of peace. Days later, Elara stood with Julian on the station's highest observation deck. Below them, in a domed arboretum, she could see her orchestra. Lyra was teaching the gambler how to turn the strings of her instrument into a visual representation of probability waves. The historian was showing others how to read the station's history in its metal walls. They were not soldiers, they were a school. A new kind of art was being born. "He hasn't spoken a word since it happened," Julian said quietly. "Leo, it's over." "No," Elara said, looking out at the endless sea of stars. "It's just beginning." Her art had once been about capturing the universe on a canvas. Now, her canvas was the universe itself, and her pigments were the souls of the lost and the found.
She was no longer just a painter or a conductor. She was a curator of hope. The war with Xylos was far from over. But for the first time, the galaxy was not just a place of silent, terrifying voids and predatory hunters. It was a place of music. And Elara Vancroft was ready for the next movement.